Well, welcome back guys to yet another video. This week I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about how to fish and set up lead core and copper lines for salmon here on the Great Lakes. And stay tuned till the end because we're going to be giving away a $200 prize to a lucky random winner. Let's get started. Okay guys, so first off I'm going to break down the gear we're using here today. We're running Okuma convector reels. This is the 55L size. You want to run the bigger size with most lead core and copper setups. We're going to be spooling up a 10 color lead core setup and a 300 copper setup, which are probably the most universal and well-rounded setups here on the Great Lakes for us. So now for the rods that we're using. On our copper rod here, we're using an Okuma Classic Pro. This is a copper lead core rod. This rod is made for copper and lead core. Now I love this rod for running my copper lines off of. It's got a good backbone and the guides are also made for that wiry steel kind of line. Now for our other rod here, for my lead core rod, my favorite rod for lead core is the Okuma Classic Pro as well, but this is just the typical salmon rod. This is also a really good downrigger rod, but I love this for the lead core because lead core is a little bit lighter than copper and you can really feel those fish fight on this rod a little bit lighter. So to start off, for both my lead core and copper reels, I'm going to add a monofilament and braided backing for both setups here. And on both reels, I'm going to start off with some 20-pound monofilament. So I'm just going to add about 50 yards of monofilament onto my reel here. This is really just going to help your braided backing sit on your reel better. I learned the hard way of not doing this at first. Sometimes if you don't put this monofilament on, your braid will overlap around the spool and it can cause you to break a big fish off. Now a lot of reels are already braid ready, but still, even with those reels, I like to do this just in case. So now I'm going to add my braided backing on here. I'm using Okuma's soft steel braided line. This is 50-pound test and it's 300 yards. I'm going to put this whole spool onto my reel for my 300 copper and my 10 color lead core. I like to make sure I at least have 200 yards of backing on, but I like to put 300 on just to be sure, especially when I'm sending my boards way out to the side here. So I'm going to attach my braided line onto my backing using the Albright knot. So this is an important step here guys. You want to make sure to double loop your monofilament, your thickest line, which is your monofilament. So I'm going to make a loop and I'm going to keep my tag end off that loop at about 6 inches. So now I'm going to take the braided line and I'm going to go through the loop here, and then I'm going to put my finger right into the loop. Now I'm going to take my braided line and wrap it around the monofilament, both strands of the monofilament, about 12 times. So I'm going to do 12 wraps and then I'm going to go back through that loop and I'm going to slowly snug it tight here. You want to make sure to go slow, use your fingernails, and also wet your knot. That way it all comes together smoothly and that knot's going to hold up really nice for you. So now I'm spooling on my braided backing. You want to make sure to use a little bit of tension when you're spooling this line on because that's just going to help that braid sit nicely on your spool. I'm also using my finger to make sure my braided line goes to each side of my spool so there's no gap on the edges of your spool. If there's a gap down deep in the edge of your spool, there's a chance that braid can double loop itself and, like I said earlier, cause you to break off on a fish. So now we're going to add our lead core line on here first. Today I'm going to be using Tough Line lead core. Now Tough Line and Suffix are my favorite types of lead core. There's also some smaller diameter running lead core lines out there, but these two are the most user friendly and they're going to help you out to get started with learning how to really fish lead core effectively. So I'm running 27-pound lead core line here today. Another tip that I like to do as well is every lead core setup I have spooled up in the boat is going to have the same pound test weight. You can get lead core in 18 pound and 36 pounds, pretty common, but I like to make sure all the lead core I'm running is 27-pound test because if you try to match up different weights of line, you're going to end up with tangles at times, and I'm going to explain that a little later. But first I'm going to get this attached to my braided backing here and we're going to spool this up. So now I'm going to connect my two lines here and I'm going to use a swivel to connect them. In this hand I have my lead core and in this hand I have my braided line. You can use a line-to-line knot with this, but I like to use a swivel because I trust it a little bit more. Now I'm using a power swivel here. I really recommend running these swivels. I've been running them for years now and I've never had a single issue with them. This is a size 8 swivel and it's 50-pound test. You want to make sure to run at least a 50-pound test swivel when connecting these lines. So I'm going to connect my braided line to my swivel here first, and I'm just going to use the standard clinch knot. It's a knot that I've always ran and I have a lot of confidence in. Okay, so but one thing I'm going to do differently than I might not do with mono is I'm going to go through the eyelet of the swivel twice. So I'm gonna go through the eyelet of the swivel twice because that's gonna really help your braid not slip through your knot. Now I'm gonna wrap this knot about 12 times, a couple more times than I typically would with mono, and then I'm just gonna snug it tight and make sure that knot really pulls tight and smooth right down to my swivel. So now I'm going to attach my lead core line onto my swivel here. Now with this lead line, you can see there's two parts to it. There's an outer coating and there's an inner lead piece here. So I'm going to pull back this outer coating from the lead piece about 8 to 10 inches or so. And I'm just going to pull that lead off. You can see how easily that broke. And I'm going to dispose of that piece. And now you can see this coating is all bunched up. So I'm just going to take my fingers and I'm going to spread it out so I have about an 8 to 10 inch piece of coating here with no lead in it. And I'm going to tie my knot using this piece. So I'm going to wet my coating, I'm going to put it through the eyelet of the swivel, and I'm going to use the clinch knot here, and I'm going to go around about 8 times. Okay, so I'm going to pull it tight, and then I'm going to trim this coating piece, and that knot is going to hold up great for you. I've been using this for years chartering, and I've never had it fail once. So now we're going to spool up our lead core onto our reel. So now I'm spooling my lead core onto my reel here. You can see there's different colors of line on, and I'm going to put 10 colors of line on. Each color is 10 yards long, and each color you let out will dive approximately 5 feet. So by adding 10 colors of line on, this setup here is going to dive approximately 50 feet. Okay guys, so now I'm going to attach my leader line onto my lead core line here. So with my lead first, I'm going to peel back this coating just like I did for the last knot, and I'm going to peel back that coating just about 5 inches or so, a little bit shorter than what I did for my last knot. I'm going to dispose of that lead. I'm going to push that coating back. So now you can see I have a 5-inch piece of just coating. Now on this lead core here, I'm going to do just a simple overhand knot. But when I do this overhand knot, I'm going to make sure it's on my lead line. So I want my coating completely out of this knot at the beginning. So now I'm going to take my leader line here. Now I'm using 25-pound test monofilament for my leader line. I like to run monofilament as my leader line because it acts as a little bit of a cushion when you have all that tension on from a planer board and you're trolling in big waves. So now I'm going to take this monofilament and I'm going to insert it into the coating of my lead core here. Now a really good trick here guys that's going to save you a lot of headache is to make sure to cut this line with a sharp pair of scissors. You can see I got my nice kindergarten scissors here, high quality, but the whole goal here is you want to make sure that's a nice smooth end on your line that you cut. If this end is jagged, then you're going to have a really hard time getting this line into this coating here. So now I'm going to insert the line. I know it can be hard to see, so I'm going to take my time and I'm going to insert this monofilament into the coating here. And I'm going to take my time, I'm going to use my fingers, I'm just using light hands, and I'm going to slowly push this coating right over top of my line here, all the way till my monofilament meets the lead inside this coating. Okay guys, so you can see I inserted that monofilament into this coating all the way till the mono touches the lead. So the end of my lead's right here and the end of my monofilament's right here. They're actually touching each other, and that's perfect. You want to close that gap up. Now you can see my little overhand knot here. This is just a super simple overhand knot. Now I'm going to slowly slide this line over my monofilament. So I'm going to pinch this piece of monofilament at the end of my coating. That way the coating doesn't pull off the monofilament. And I'm going to slowly work this overhand knot down all the way to my finger. That way the monofilament is fully inside that knot. You want to make sure the monofilament is coming past the knot a couple inches. So this monofilament's coming all the way to right here, because that's going to be what holds these two lines together. So now I'm going to tighten this knot with my fingers, then I'm going to take the line and I'm going to tighten it, and guys, that knot will never give. I've been using that for years while fishing and chartering on the Great Lakes, and I've never had it give one time. So I'm going to wind up just about a 30-foot piece. It doesn't have to be perfect. I use anywhere from an 18 to a 50-foot piece of leader, and then I'm just going to snip this leader line off here, and I'm going to show you the next step. So now we're going to finish up our leader here, guys. I have my 25-pound test piece of monofilament right here, and I'm going to attach a 5-foot piece of 20-pound test fluorocarbon onto this monofilament here by using another small black barrel swivel. Now if I'm running a J plug, I like to just tie a swivel straight to this 25-pound test mono, and you can can run a spoon tied straight to this as well, but I like to run a 5-foot piece of 20-pound test fluorocarbon to my spoons just because it gives them a little bit more action. That's just personal preference. Like I said, you can definitely tie your spoon straight to this 25-pound test piece of mono, and if I run a J-plug, I'll always tie it onto my monofilament here. I am not a big fan of running flasher flies off my lead core lines. I do like to run flasher flies off my coppers, however, and we'll get to that next. But now I'm going to add my barrel swivel onto this main line here. I'm gonna run that same barrel swivel you saw me tie earlier, that same 50-pound test barrel swivel, and I'm gonna attach a 5-foot piece of fluorocarbon leader onto it. For my leader line, I'm using Seagar 20-pound test fluorocarbon. My favorite brands of fluorocarbon are Seagar Red Label and SC Sniper. Then we're just gonna add our snap swivel onto the end of our line here. Now my two favorite brands of swivels are Power Lock swivels and Torpedo Diver snap swivels. You wanna make sure to run a high quality ball bearing swivel, something that's really going to hold up well. We're just going to use the clinch knot here, and that is ready to fish, guys. We're going to get a spoon on that in a little bit here, but first we're going to set up our copper rod, then we're going to go put both of these to the test. Okay, so now we're going to set up our copper setup here. We added the braid and mono onto our copper reel just like we did the lead core reel. We did everything the same, but now things get a little bit different. So we have blood run tackle. This is 45-pound test copper line. This is my favorite kind of copper line. We're gonna add this onto our braided line backing now. So first off, I tied my swivel onto my braided backing just like I did before, and I'm using a copper connector kit here. So this is a good kit to get you guys started, and what it has here is some swivels, some crimps, and some heat shrink tubing. Now I'm just gonna use the swivel and the heat shrink tubing here. You can also use the same power swivel that I used on the lead core as well. So I'm gonna take this heat shrink tubing and I'm gonna slide this onto my copper line here. Now I already slid it on, but you can see that's about a 2-3 inch piece of heat shrink tubing. Now I'm gonna attach this copper line onto my swivel here. So now I'm gonna thread my copper line through the eye of my swivel here, and I'm not even gonna use a knot to tie this, guys. I'm just gonna wrap this copper around itself nice and tight as I can get it here. So I'm gonna leave about a 4-inch tagging piece here off my swivel, if you can see that, and I'm gonna take this line and I'm gonna start off by getting it tight as I can. You can see I put a bend in it there, and I'm gonna get that tight to the swivel, and I'm just gonna wrap this tag-in piece of this copper as tight as I can all the way up my line. I'm gonna wrap this entire tag-in piece up my line here, and I'm wrapping these wraps as tight as I can possibly get them. I'm using my fingernails to push this line together. Now that I have that tag piece all wrapped nice and tight, I'm gonna slide this heat shrink tubing over my wraps as best as I can all the way down to my swivel. I'm gonna put it halfway down my swivel, and then I'm gonna use my lighter to cinch this heat shrink tubing down. So I'm gonna start with one end, but you want to try to just get the tubing as much as you can, and I'm going to go on both sides, and then you can see that's going to shrink down. Now it might be a best idea too, guys, to do this before you attach your braided line on, just so you don't run the risk of cinching your line off with your lighter here. But you can see that's nice and tight, so I'm going to go to my other end, and I'm gonna do that again as well. And I'm actually gonna redo my braided line knot here just in case, but you can see that shrink tubing cinched down nice and tight. Like I said, you might wanna do this part before attaching your braided line on, so you don't have the chance of loosening it up or cinching it down, weakening it with this lighter here. Okay, so now we're all connected here. Our copper line is wrapped nice and tight. We have our heat shrink tubing on. We have that nice and cinched down with a lighter. It's nice and tight onto our copper line, and we have our braided line tied onto our swivel here. Now I have done this also, guys, for years without using this tubing, this heat shrink tubing, but this heat shrink tubing definitely helps preserve your knot a little bit longer, helps the life of your knot. I'd recommend doing it. You don't have to in a pinch, but I would recommend doing it. Okay guys, we just finished up spooling our copper line on here. Now I'm gonna give you a little tip that might help you. I'll try to do the best job of explaining as I can, because Maggie was looking at me like I'm not making any sense at all. But sometimes you'll add on too much backing, too much braided backing or mono backing, and you'll find you won't be able to add all your copper or lead core line on your spool because it simply won't reel anymore. So I would suggest doing this in an open field where you can fine tune your backing. If you find that you can't quite get all your line on, you might want to stretch your line back out, tie your line to a tree, walk it across the field, and take a little bit of your backing off to help get all that line on. It can be a little bit of a headache at first, and it really turns into an eyeball thing. I've been doing this for quite a while now, so I've gotten pretty good at it over the years, but I remember when I first started that I had quite a headache. So now guys, we're gonna add our leader onto our copper here. You can see we have our heat shrink tubing attached to our swivel. We did everything the same as we connected it to our backing like we showed you, but this time we're connecting our leader here. So I'm running Trilene Big Game 25-pound test monofilament, and I'm just gonna add a 30-foot leader onto this piece of copper here. Now if I'm running a spoon, I will then attach a swivel and a 5-foot piece of 20-pound test fluorocarbon on, just like I did to the lead core line. But if I'm running a J plug or a flasher fly or flasher meat rig combo, then I'm going to run this line directly to that combo. I'm gonna run my monofilament straight from my copper to my flasher fly. I really like to run mono off my boards, at least a little stretch of it, because it acts as a snubber. It acts as a little bit of cushion because your mono is gonna stretch, and it makes a big difference, especially when you get big waves and big fish on. Okay guys, we're gonna get our line deployed here. It's right before dark. We're gonna run a spoon on our copper line. I'm gonna run, this is a Magnum Moonshine Carbon 14 Super Glow. We're gonna run this heavy glow here right before dark. I have a Coast Lock ball bearing swivel. That's probably my favorite swivel, honestly. The Coast Lock ball bearing swivel, that's my favorite swivel. So I'm gonna get this out now. So I'm gonna get this copper line going out here guys, and I'm gonna do everything real slow here. So I got my thumb on the spool, and I'm just stripping this line out real slow. I don't want that copper to back spool because that's gonna cause kinks and it's gonna cause problems down further in your spool. So I'm just gonna let this line out real slow until it starts to get rolling. Okay guys, so now we're gonna get on our planer board here. Now I'm running a 300-foot copper line right now. From a 300-foot copper line down to a 350, a 400 or more, I like to run these big boards. These are gonna pull those heavy copper lines nicely. This is a Dreamweaver Ninja board, and this is a Church Tackle TX44 Magnum board. So these two boards pull copper lines nicely. Now if you're running a higher copper, like a 200, a 250, you could get away with the smaller board, but I really like how these big boards pull these heavy copper lines. Okay, so I got all my copper line in the water. I'm letting out about 20 feet of braided line. Now I'm gonna attach my planer board here guys. So I'm gonna take my braided line, and this is a Dreamweaver Ninja board here. So I'm gonna press down on this clip here. I'm gonna press down on that clip. I'm gonna put my braided backing into this release here, and then I'm gonna wrap it behind the spool one time. And then I'm gonna take the back end of the line, I'm gonna pinch this release, same one more time, and that's gonna thread in there nicely, okay? Now I'm gonna let this behind the boat here. I'm gonna let this straight behind the boat for about 50 feet at least. That way I'm making sure it's not gonna get tangled into my divers. Okay guys, so I got my board back behind the boat about 75 feet. Now I'm gonna start slowing it down a little bit, and I'm just gonna inch it over these diver lines off to the side of the boat. Now a thing to keep in mind here guys is to always pay attention to where your divers are at. We're running Magnum deeper divers right now on wire line, so we don't really have to worry about this copper line getting into those divers. But if we were running a high diver, a slide diver, or a standard size dipsy or deeper diver way back there 200-300 feet, we would really want to watch this copper line so it doesn't get into that diver once we get the planer board on here. So what I'm doing here is, like I said, I dropped it straight back about 75 feet. Now I'm kind of holding the spool. I'm just inching it out to the side of the boat here. I'm making sure it's starting to pull. I'm making sure it's starting to pull right over our diver lines, and this is going to be fishing perfect. Oh, rigger, 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 rigger!
He scared me.
You got him on the rigger! Okay guys, now we're gonna get our 10 color lead core out here that you saw us put together. Oh my gosh, I just saw a big fish jump right there, Mags. Oh my gosh, it looked like a big steelhead. I'm not even kidding you guys. I was looking at the camera and I just saw a big steelhead. I'm pretty sure it's a steelhead come out of the water. Okay, let's try to stay focused here. We're gonna get our 10 color set up here that you saw us put together. We got an RV Magnum Moonshine Green Jeans. This is a great bait. You probably saw it in one of our previous videos, 12 spoons you must have. If you haven't checked that out, we're gonna put a link in the description here. But we're gonna let this line out just like we did the copper line. We're gonna send it straight behind the boat, and then we're gonna attach our planer board onto it. Okay, so now we're gonna add our planer board onto our backing for our lead core here. Now when I'm running lead core line, guys, I like to run these Church Tackle TX22 planer boards. These are a little bit lighter than the planer boards that we use for our copper line, and that's because lead core is a little bit lighter than copper. So these boards work perfect from 1 color all the way down to 10 color lead core setups. How I hook this board on here is I have my release clip. I'm gonna put this backing right down into the release clip, then I'm gonna wrap it underneath the stem, and I'm gonna put it right back down into the bottom of that release clip. That way I know that my braid isn't gonna slip through that release clip when I get a fish on. So I'm gonna let this out. I'm gonna let it out just like I let my copper out. I'm gonna drop it straight behind the boat, and I'm gonna let it pull over my divers. Now a helpful tip as well is when you're letting this planer board out, to make sure that planer board is sitting on the right side up. So the weight on the planer board, there's always a weight on the planer board, is down in the water and the board is right side up. If you let that planer board straight back where it's sitting flat on the water, then sometimes that board will dive underwater and will start pulling in the opposite direction, and it can cause you a big headache. So take mind to that tip, because I've been there before myself. Okay, so I got it straight behind the boat here, guys. It's about 75 feet behind the boat. I'm gonna turn my clicker on. I'm gonna loosen my drag just so that line starts to creep out slowly. That planer board's starting to dig, but it's still pulling off to the side, and I'm gonna let it go out the rest of the way in the rod holder nice and slow so it can get over my divers and off to the side of the boat. Okay, so that's about where I want this board here, guys. Now I'm gonna tighten my drag just so it's barely not clicking out in the rod holder. You can see I'm gonna loosen it here a little bit, and you can see this drag starting to tick out a bit. So I'm gonna tighten this just so it barely stops clicking. You wanna make sure you have plenty of drag, because if that's too tight, you will snap big fish off. I've done it before and it happens. Sometimes the drag just snugs up on its own, but you wanna make sure to keep checking your drags on these planer boards, that they're not getting too tight. So now, guys, I'm gonna talk a little bit about how to run multiple planer boards per side here. Now, whether you're running copper or lead core line, you always wanna make sure to have your deepest running line on your inside board here. So say you're running a 10 color setup on this inside board here, and I wanna put out an 8 color setup on the outside of my 10 color. What I'm gonna do here, so this is my 10 color and it's fishing, and I'm here in the boat. I'm gonna let this board out with my 8 color way behind my 10 color here. Then I'm gonna shut my drag off, and I'm gonna pull it behind my 10 color. I'm gonna drop it back about at least 50 feet behind my 10 color, pull it behind the 10 color, and run it way out to the side. If you try to get these boards too close together inside of 50 feet, you're running with the devil, and you can have a trip ruining tangle, and I've been there myself, let me tell you. So one more thing to add when you're running multiple planer boards per side. If you're running lead core lines, you want to space out your lead cores by at least 2 colors. 2 colors goes down about 10 feet in the water column, and you want to make sure your lines are spread out by about 10 feet in the water column. If you go inside of that, you're risking it again, and you can really run a high risk at getting those lines together. Now, if I'm running copper lines, I'm gonna spread out those copper lines by at least 75 feet, but I would recommend 100 feet for you guys. If you're not completely comfortable with running multiple planer boards per side, I would spread out those lines by about 100 feet. So if I'm running a 300-foot copper on my inside board, I would run a 200-foot copper on my outside board, or I would run a 400-foot copper on the inside of my 300. That's just gonna ensure all your lines are spread out by at least 10-15 feet in the water column, and you're gonna run a far less chance of getting tangled. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this how-to video and you learned a thing or two. If you did, make sure to go down below here and hit that thumbs up button for us, and also subscribe if you're new. But now Maggie is gonna break down the rules of the giveaway that we're giving out. We're gonna be giving away $200 in prizes of flashers that I love to run here on the Great Lakes that I know are gonna work for you guys. So let's head to Mags.
Okay guys, so now I'm gonna explain the rules for entering the giveaway. We're gonna be giving away $200 worth of Michigan Stinger flashers. These are some of Kyle's favorite colors. And entering the giveaway is really simple. All you guys need to do is make sure that you're subscribed to our channel, hit the thumbs up button on this video, and then comment below either what kind of how-to videos you want to see from us in the future, or your favorite kind of fishing. We will be entering everyone into a random drawing, and we'll draw a name in 2 weeks and announce the winner in our video, so good luck.
Bye.